Assalamu alaikum everybody, and in this video we have a lot to cover. We're going to be refuting the Mu'tazili position on the creation of the actions of the servants, or at least making the case for the Ash'ari. And we begin by stating what is unacceptable for us average people here. What is unacceptable is the belief in Jabr. Jabr means the compulsion. We believe that it is unacceptable to believe that God is forcing his servants to do certain things, that they are compelled to do certain things, and then he punishes them. It is unacceptable. This makes them seem like they're basically a tree leaf fluttering in the wind. The wind blows left, the tree leaf goes left. The wind blows right, the tree leaf goes right. And here is where Al-Ash'ari's belief or theory of acquisition or kasb comes in. And we've explained this in the previous video. And you shouldn't actually be watching this video if you hadn't watched the previous video, which explains what is the Ash'ari's view on the creation of the actions of the servants. So this would be a part 2 in this sense. And we start right away. We are going to dive into the crux of this. We will take chapter 9, verse 24, which says, "Fight them. Allah will punish them by your hands." What do we have in this verse? We have several components. We have an order by God saying, fight them. Now you as a servant, you have choice. You have the freedom of choice. You are not compelled or forced by God. You make your own free choice. You can either choose to obey God and actually go and fight them, or disobey. If you disobey, you will be punished. If you obey, you will be rewarded. So then what does the verse say? God will punish them by your hands. Why is it God will punish them by your hands? Why isn't it that we are the ones punishing them, since we are the ones fighting? And this is what Al-Ash'ari says, that God is creating the actions. So you made your decision to go and fight. So God creates this action of you swinging their swords and swinging your sword and fighting and beating them up. And this is how basically God is punishing them by your hands, by creating the actions that are the result of your decision to obey God on this. It is also important for the listeners or the viewers in this case to know that the Ash'aris believe in something called wahdatul af'al. Wahdatul af'al. You all know wahdatul wujud, the unity of existence or creation, whereas in everything is God and God is everything. This is a belief that is rejected by the majority of Muslims that have sound aqidah. You have something else called wahdatul af'al, meaning the unity of actions, which states basically that there's only one entity producing these actions, and this entity is God. This is there's no one else capable of doing the action. There's no power except the power of God. So that means that every planetary rotation, every shooting star, every raindrop colliding with the earth, all is in God's power. And here we will quote chapter 16, verse 79, which says, "Do they not see the birds controlled in the atmosphere of the sky? None holds them except Allah." It is saying that even the bird in the sky that's flying, God is the one holding it. It's not the fluttering of its wings that's really causing it to fly. It is God holding it. And this is God's, subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is his great and absolute power over everything. We know that God literally creates out of nothing. He is the original creator. Whereas if we see in the religious text or in an Arabic text from the Quran, if we see the word creation attributed to a servant of God, to a creature, this is usually in a metaphorical sense. It means to fashion or to manipulate what's already there through a temporary power that is created in this creature by God as a result, obviously, of this servant's choice. A good example of this to illustrate is if we say, the man died. The man died. So what are we doing here? We're attributing the action of dying to the man. He died, right? We all know in reality, it's not up to the man. It's not his action. In fact, if it were up to the man, he would choose to live. He wouldn't die. It's actually that God caused the dying to happen. And this is in the Quran. We all read the Quran. We all read that. In the Quran, Allah says that he's the one who gives life and he's the one who controls death. Many Christians apostated and they left Christianity. Why? They were taught that God is love. Right? This is from the simple preachings of the church. And then in real life, they would witness bloody wars. And they would question. You always see this even in their movies. They always question, how can God let this happen? and then they leave the religion because there's a conflict. They're not understanding exactly how God operates, and they were being taught certain things that are conflicting with their intellect. The Mu'tazila knew that the servants of God commit many acts of indecency, rape, pillaging, murdering, sacking, cheating, stealing, and they don't want these things to be attributed to God. They wanted to exonerate God from being from having been blamed for these actions, and they were saying that, well, if God created evil, that means God is evil. We don't want people saying that, and we thank the Mu'tazila. This is a pretty noble thought they have, but it caused them to mess up because of their lack of understanding. They assumed they understood the whole operation here, but they didn't, and this caused them. And you will see, we will quote more verses here, and we'll quote more religious texts that are just common sense and straightforward, and you will see how their belief is not in sync with what the Quran preaches, what the Sunnah even says. As for those who follow them blindly, like the Shia, they're going to be in the bigger mess because they don't have many geniuses among them, apparently. So first of all, if God created evil, then God is evil. This is what they say. We say there's a difference between being a creator and being an actor. There's a difference. So let's say if God created a bird flying, that doesn't mean that God is flying, right? God created that action, but the bird is the one that's flying, not God. Likewise, if God created a murderer, that doesn't mean he's the murderer. The murderer is the person who chose to commit murder and kill another human being. God simply created that power because he allowed them, and he was tested through this. Similarly, you can also, have you seen a cockroach? They're disgusting, right? Well, guess what? God created cockroaches. Does that mean that God is disgusting, since God created something disgusting? Or is it that God didn't create the cockroach? The cockroach created itself. So we're saying here that God shouldn't necessarily be described by something if he simply created it. If God created laziness, that doesn't mean that God is lazy. Similarly, if God created evil and good, that doesn't mean that God is described by evil. He simply created that phenomenon. In Islam, we are ordered to strive through material means. We call it al-akhdhu bil-asbab. So for example, if we got sick, if I am sick, then I'm ordered to seek the material means, meaning to go and get medicine. I don't just sit and expect to be healed on my own by some magical power. No. I have to go and take the medicine. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ says. He says, tadawaw, meaning go seek the medicine. And he would order his companions to go and consult with doctors if they were sick. And he would recommend doctors to them. However, we were taught that the healing is not of the medicine itself. So when I'm consuming this medicine, it is not that this medicine is actually healing me. It is God that is healing me. And if God wills it, the medicine would have no effect and it wouldn't heal me. Similarly, we avoid the fire because it can burn us. But we do not believe that the fire has a power in and of itself which it developed to burn us. Rather, it is God that causes it to burn. What is the best example of this? We all know that Prophet Ibrahim a.s. was forced to walk into the fire. He went into the fire. All right, so physically speaking, according to the laws of science, fire should interact with his skin and should burn it, right? Well, it didn't burn it because simply God chose to save him. Allah willed that he be saved. The kuffar willed that he be burned. And so the fire, the laws of science were unmade in that occasion. And Ibrahim alayhi salam was saved. This is why we say, according to Ahl Sunnah, that cause and effect are simply an illusion. That everything is in fact by God, is by God's command. And God, it is not an insult to say that God created a thing and its opposite, because he created it and he set it up for us to be tested. It is actually a praise for God to glorify him that he created this complex world in all of its concepts and phenomena, and all of these things interacting to get together, so that it becomes an adequate testing ground for God's servants, and that they may get rewarded at the end of the day. So it is good to quote a story here. It's actually an event, a debate that happened between two giants. In the presence of the caliph at the time, you had two giant scholars. One is Al-Qadi Abd al-Jabbar al-Mu'tazili, who represents the Mu'tazilite school. And the next one is Abu Ishaq al-Isfirayini, who is one of the biggest scholars of Ahl Sunnah. So when the Mu'tazili scholar entered, and he saw the Sunni scholar sitting there, he wanted to argue against him right away. So he said, "Praise be to the one exonerated from indecency." The Mu'tazili meant not to attribute God to God that he created things like evil, or he created things like evil men or tyrants or this or that. So he's saying, praise be to the one who is exonerated from indecency, meaning we do not attribute these things to him. So the Sunni replied to him, he said, praise be to the one in whose dominion nothing occurs except by his will. Look at this beautiful answer. He's saying that this whole realm, this whole universe and world is the dominion of God, and nothing happens in this world except what God wills to happen. So the Mu'tazili, knowing that there are people who are sinning, who are disobeying God out there, the Mu'tazili argued right away. Is it God's will that he be disobeyed? Is God willing that people should disobey him? So the Sunni scholar responded, is God being forcefully disobeyed in spite of his will? Are these servants imposing their will upon God and forcing him, and he did not will this, but they are forcing it upon him? Of course not. Because we all know that everything happens by God's will, basically. And in the Quran it says that if God wished to guide everyone, he could have created a world where everybody's guided and end of story. There's no need for anything else. And also God says that if we were to stop sinning, that he would make us perish and replace us with servants who would sin and also seek his forgiveness. So God willed for this to happen in the world. He willed for there to be good and bad so that we may be tested, simply. If we say that things are happening without his will, that some other entity is imposing its will upon God, then this becomes a sort of like pagan dualism. It's called Thanawi. Pagan dualism is like basically Zoroastrianism, where you have two opposing forces. There's the god of light and the god of dark. Or for example, ancient religions in Egypt, they have the god of like violence, which is Seth, and then the god of life and goodness, which is Osiris. So in Islam, there's no such thing as two gods or two forces clashing. There is only one God. Even Iblis is nothing but a lowly servant of God. He has no independent power, and God could put him out just like that. He could put him out. Continuing on, the Mu'tazili argued, if God has misguided me, and if God has decreed that I fail, meaning end up in hellfire, then has God benefited me or harmed me? The Mu'tazili asks. And here he is hinting towards a lutf, which is the godly grace, which is a belief that they have. So the Sunni gave a really beautiful, deep philosophical reply. He said, if God prevented you from something that is rightfully yours, then he has oppressed you. But if he deprived you from what is essentially his, know that he is the owner of the kingdom. He does as he pleases. And mashallah, this is a really deep philosophical reply. And this on its own would require maybe volumes to just comment on it. But what we need to know from this is that God is never asked about what he does. We will be asked about what we do. Another thing that people of intelligence would say, another point that could be brought up basically, is that the creator of a tool knows more about this tool than anybody else. If a scientist created a machine, then he essentially knows more about it than any other person because he created it. He knows every inch of it, every screw where it is, every tool, what it does, what are the functions exactly. He has the plans and the drawings. So let's say right now that I extend my hand. I just extended my hand. All right, what do we conclude from this? Do I know exactly how many muscles in my body moved? Do I know what was the speed in which my hand extended? What is the velocity? How much space was occupied by my hand? What was the tension of the muscles? Well, I do not know anything. If I don't know anything about it, then how can I really say that I created it? We say that God actually knows all of that. And how many times did you want to eat something? How many times did you want to you pick up some food, you want to eat it, and right before the food reaches your mouth, it drops to the floor. If you were the one who was creating this action, then you would do it properly because you created the action of yourself eating this food. However, the fact that it just falls right before it reaches your mouth, this is a subtle sign from God showing you that, look, I am the one in control. You are not the one in control, and success is only from me and through me. This is illustrated in many places in the Book of Allah in the Quran. For example, if we take chapter 81, verse 29, it says, and you do not will except that Allah wills. This is saying that, okay, my will was to eat, but God's will was that no food should enter my mouth. And so, the food drops to the floor. There's always a will above your own will, and your will cannot be imposed or cannot be, dominant over God's will. His will is absolute. And this is how He tests us. He tests us through the ability to choose, which He has given us, this trust, this amana. And similarly, we Muslims always say that if all of humanity gathered to aid us, but God wills otherwise, then we will not be helped. It's as simple as that. So there's always a will above our will. And this is just illustrating God's power. Another verse in the Quran, verse 17 of chapter 8, it says, and you do not kill them, but it was Allah who killed them. And you threw not, O Muhammad, when you threw, but it was Allah who threw. Again, same thing here. Another verse, we have chapter 10, verse 22. It says, it is He who enables you to travel on land and sea until when you are in ships and they sail by them by a good wind and rejoice therein. There comes a storm, and when the waves come upon them from everywhere, they assume that they are surrounded, supplicating Allah, sincere to Him in religion. They say, if you do not save us from this, we will surely be among the thankful. So what is being said here again, if they were the ones that are creating this and they're in control, then there's no need to supplicate God. But they understand that God is in control of everything. God is in control of the winds, the waves, and everything. That's why they're supplicating God, save us. Because He has a power and control over these things. These things are not creating their own actions and their own, physical phenomena. Another verse here we take is chapter 56, verse 64. And have you seen that seed which you sow? It is you who makes it grow, or are you the growers? So is it you who makes it grow, or are we the growers, God says. So even the seeds that you're planting, the farmers that are planting the seeds, God is telling them, it is not you who are making these seeds grow. You're watering it and all of that. It is God who's actually making it grow. Again, He's just emphasizing that He's in control of everything. The story of Prophet Nuh, this is in chapter 54, verse 13. And we carried him on a construction of planks and nails, sailing under our observation as a reward for he who had been denied. So notice the words here of Allah. And we carried him on a construction of planks. He's attributing the action to Himself again. So here we ask, is this justice? The Mu'tazila basically ask this question. They ask, is this justice? If God is creating the action, is this justice? And we already replied to this, that it is the servants who are making the choice. But there's no harm in mentioning like a story, again, to illustrate that it is in fact justice. Let's say a father told his son, they're in a room, and he told his son, don't turn on the lights while I'm away. And there's a light switch on the table. He told him, don't flick this light switch and turn on the lights while I'm away. If you do, I will punish you. And then the father leaves. And when the father leaves, the son, he didn't want to listen. He went and he switched the light switch. However, little did the son, this little kid know, little did he know, that this light switch he was flickering, it is actually useless. It's not connected to the light bulb. And that the father was waiting outside looking through the window, and he actually had the real light switch with him. And so when the father saw that the son flipped the switch the father from outside flipped the actual switch and the light turned on. And then the father, when he came back inside, he told him, "Why did you disobey me?" And he punished him. Is this injustice? It is obviously is the epitome of justice. There's nothing unjust about that. And this is like a simplified example of what is taking place here, obviously. In the Quran, there's another beautiful and explicit verse. It seems as if this verse is just directed towards the Mu'tazila. This is chapter 4, verse 78. It says, "But if good comes to them, they say, 'This is from Allah.' And if evil befalls them, they say, 'This is from you.' So God then instructs him. He says, 'Say, all things are from Allah, both the good and the bad,' meaning. So what is the matter with those people that they can hardly understand any statement? You see how clear this verse is? And I actually recommend that you go to the Quran and you check this verse out, chapter 4, verse 78. Look at how clear it is. However, this is followed by another verse that may appear a little bit problematic for some people who do not understand. So the other verse that comes after it, which is the verse 79, of course, it says, "What comes to you of good is from Allah, but what comes to you of evil, O mankind, is from yourselves." You're saying, how is this possible? The verse right before it says that they are both from Allah. So what is it? What does this next verse means? Is it a contradiction? And this is what some atheists would say. In reality, the second verse is simply saying that whatever evil befalls you is what you have acquired. It is addressing mankind and telling them any evil that befalls you is a result of what you have acquired from your unfortunate choices of disobedience, choices that you've made that are evil choices. You choose to disobey God, so he creates the consequence, which is this evil that befalls you. This is explained a little bit more, in fact, in another verse of the Quran. This is chapter 42, verse 30. It says, "And whatever strikes you of disaster, it is for what you have acquired." فَبِمَا كَسَبْتُمْ in the Arabic. Kasab, acquisition. It is for what you have acquired by your own hands, but he pardons much. The word hands here in the Quran is a metaphor. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is because of things you did with your hands. It means that these are choices that you made. So because of your choices, you acquire the evil that befalls you. And this is all that we've been saying. And this is kasab of al-Ash'ari. This is the al-Ash'ari's acquisition. Now that we conclude with this final point. And this point is called al-adabu ma'allah. It is being respectful towards God. When addressing God, you have to be very respectful. And this is illustrated by, for example, when Amir al-Mu'mineen Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, when he would stand on the pulpits and he would give sermons, he would say, "Whatever good thing I say is from God. Whatever mistake I make in my speech, this is from myself." And this is the adab. This is the respect that he has. Because we all know that God creates, obviously, everything. God created pigs, for instance. How many of you, when you're making supplication to God, when you're making dua, how many of you will say, "O creator of pigs"? Would you say that? Doesn't that sound disrespectful to you? We always want to attribute the beautiful things to God. We will say, "O creator of heavens," right? This is beautiful. We attribute it to God. Not because we think that God didn't create pigs. He obviously did. But this is a matter of adab. It becomes a matter of respect. Prophets of God understood this. For example, Prophet Ibrahim, again, in Surah Al-Shu'ara, he says, his dua, is making supplication to Allah. He says, "Who created me and who guides me? And it is he who feeds me and gives me drink. And when I am ill, it is he who cures me." So the last part, notice the last part. He says, "When I am ill, it is he who cures me." He doesn't attribute to him the action of sickness. He doesn't say, "Oh, it is he who makes me sick and then he cures me." This is out of respect, even though we know everything is from Allah. It says so clearly in the Quran that afflictions are from God. And like I'll quote verse 17 of chapter 6. What does it say? It says, "If God sends you harm, there is no one but He who can take it away. If God sends you harm, there's no one but He who can take it away. And if He brings you good, surely He has power over everything. Even clearer in Surah Al-Najm, it says, this is verse 48 by the way, it says, and that it is He who makes one laugh and weep. He makes you happy and sad, that means. If sadness is a bad thing and an evil thing, you cannot attribute it to God, right? According to Mu'tazilites and their lackeys. But here God is saying, it is He who makes you laugh and weep. And then He says after it, and that it is He who enriches and impoverishes. So ponder upon this. May God bless you. And I hope this video was useful, and possibly we'll have a third video on the same topic, which is خلق أفعال العباد, the creation of the actions of the servants. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.